Ever since the dawn of mankind, we as a species have been inclined to hunting. In the early days of our history, we did it out of necessity, purely to sustain ourselves, a simple cog in the machinery of natural survival. But as history progressed and the quality of our living conditions increased, we eventually began hunting animals as a sport, hunting them for trophies, not out of necessity, but for the thrill of the chase, the thrill of the kill. And now we've gone beyond that. Now the chase is no longer for animals. Now we hunt each other. What hides in the shadows, and evil lurks within the darkness. The Hunters of Louisiana were a collective of rather eccentric individuals attracted to the prospect of hunting the most extreme of prey, both demons and humans alike. This led them to the bayous of Louisiana, where demonic entities had overwhelmed the native population and left endless opportunity for the thrill of hunting. For within the hunting grounds, fame, fortune, and glory were all found in abundance, if you had the guts to enter, and the prowess to make it out alive. These hunters of all genders, ages, nationalities, and occupations would flock to Louisiana from all over the world. And while their motivations and aspirations might have been vastly different from one another, they were all united under the same desire: to hunt for one or several of the lucrative contracts within the bayous. A challenge that until the winter of 1894 was restricted to only the most naturally gifted of mankind, hunters born with the ability to resist the effects of darkness and channel the world of shadows. However, this would all change with the creation of the Serum and the initiation of the blood ritual. The creation of the Serum, a dangerous concoction with more side effects than benefits, was a complex procedure of barbarous slaughter, human sacrifice, and ceremonial conjuration, carried out by a particularly ruthless hunter by the name of Lynch. She was known by other hunters to be untrustworthy, to say the least, and would eventually end up killing Dr. Huff Jones, the director of the American Hunters Association, due to their disagreements. But that is a completely different story for another time. The ritual for the serum would require a live human body. The subject would of course have to be incapacitated with blunt force, and then pacified with a powerful sedative, as no human in their right state of mind would ever agree to what would follow next. With their tongue removed to ensure they couldn't call for help should they wake up in the process of the ritual, the victim was nailed to the ground through hands and feet with large railroad spikes. The conjurer would then gouge out one of the victim's eyes, which along with the tongue would be used for the summoning itself. The victim's entire body, except for their face, would then be flayed with surgical tools, leaving nothing behind but the exposed muscle tissue beneath. The skin and flesh would be stripped and dried in the sun and braided into a sacrificial rope, which would come into use later. On the remains of the tongue inside the victim's mouth, a message with the conjurer's name would be sewn into place, a so-called calling card to the other side, if you will. A pentacle of salt would be laid out on the ground, with the victim placed on the border of the circle, functioning as both bait and as a bridge to enter the pentacle. Inside and outside of the circle, demonic symbols would be painted with ash, completing what would function as both a summon as well as a trap. And with the bait in place, the trap was ready, and there was nothing left but to wait. It wouldn't take long before all of a sudden something otherworldly would appear. Something too other to be described in words. A creature, entity, or demon. Words that all seem a little too human to describe the physical appearance of this faceless abomination that would be drawn to this sacrifice. Like a shark smelling blood in the water, it would approach the victim with its large purple tongue, licking greedily at the exposed muscles of the victim. Then, with the demon atop of the victim, the conjurer would spring into action, pushing the demon into the pentacle before lassoing and binding it with the sacrificial rope made out of the victim's skin, permanently trapping it under its spell. The conjurer would then kill and distill the demon through a week-long process that would eventually turn the demon's corpse into a liquid that could be filled into syringes. the so-called Serum. This serum gave anyone who dared inject it into their bloodstream a strong, though not permanent, resistance towards the influence of evil found within the bayous. It also protected female hunters from the unspeakable fate of becoming hives, as well as the potential of them giving birth to so-called meatheads, which were the result of natural pregnancy within the bayous. And most importantly, it gifted them with the ability of sight. The hunters would use the sight to channel shadows and darkness, putting them in the middle of what they described to be a drifting storm of leaves of ashes, momentarily making them able to track otherworldly energy that poured into our realm through so-called rifts. These rifts were used by demons to travel between our world and their own, and the hunters would perceive these rifts as strong, blue glowing energy that would be impossible to unsee, even when they closed their eyes. And like a moth into the flame, they were drawn to it, unable to refrain from giving into its intoxicating pull. A faint static or howling accompanied the glow in the rift's immediate surroundings, as if the rift itself were calling out to the hunters. Upon finding one of the rifts, the hunter would consume it. The hunter's soul would be engulfed in fire as they would spiritually be dragged into hell, experiencing countless deaths over and over again. Fingers broke, lacerations and deep cuts tore through their skin, joints were bent out of their sockets, fingernails pulled from their roots, all while hundreds of teeth bit into their flesh, jaws crushed their bones, necks were torn and twisted, and skin was boiled and charred. Time went by in an instant and stood still for an eternity at the same time. As they returned to their own world, the hunter would have narrowed down the location of the contract, taking them one step closer to the lair, making them able to proceed in their mission. And while the pain of the interaction with the rift was ungodly, the thing the hunters seemed to remember the most was the smell of their own burned flesh and the stench of sulfur that reeked from the remains of the rift. Yet despite all of this, most hunters would long for the warmth that came with consuming the rift, as they would grow cold and weary without them. A dangerous game of diminishing return, like a heroin addict slowly building tolerance against his addiction. The rift would provide the hunters with momentary warmth and satisfaction, but would, unbeknownst to them, take a fragment of their humanity with every interaction as well. Eventually, when 3 rifts had been closed, the hunter would know the location of the contract they were hunting, allowing them to approach and kill this otherworldly entity before banishing it back to hell. Upon the completion of the banishing, the hunter would remove the bounty from the remains of the demon, granting him a temporary ability to detect other hunters through darkside. What these bounties actually were, still unclear, even to this day. But it's no secret that wealthy people outside of the bayous paid a lot of money for them, making the hunting grounds a lucrative business opportunity for people who had very little or absolutely nothing to lose in life. With every safe extraction from the hunting grounds, the hunter would not only become more experienced, adapting to events and their surroundings, becoming a more ferocious predator, they would also grow closer to the other side, intertwining with darkness ever so slowly to gain supernatural abilities, far beyond what our own world would allow any regular human. Some hunters were rumored to have thickened their skin, giving them the ability to survive violent blunt trauma, sustain heavy internal bleedings, and gain a natural resistance towards fire and toxins. Some hunters were even rumored to have been able to raise fallen comrades from the dead and close rifts from afar purely by the use of their minds. Some could resist the darkness within the hunting grounds better than others, being able to operate as hunters within the bayous for decades without seeming affected by the influence of evil. Others would lose themselves to darkness almost immediately, crumbling under the fear, stress, and anxiety, letting madness take a hold of them before finally succumbing to the will of the demons, becoming yet another part of the mindless horde of atrocities wandering the swamp of Louisiana. Whatever their motivations might have been, if it was the thrill of the hunt, the hope of finding fame, building a reputation for themselves, even the simplest of desires, such as providing a steady rate of income, there is no arguing that the occupation as a Louisiana hunter was a high-risk, low-reward job in a fierce and hostile environment where expectations were shattered immediately lives were extinguished in an instant, and souls were bound to the eternal horrors of damnation and torture forever. Hey there, Hazmat here. I just want to give a big thanks to Rexley. He is basically a human encyclopedia of Hunt Showdown knowledge and has helped me a lot in putting this video together. If you enjoy this type of content and would like to support the channel, don't forget to like the video and hit the subscribe button. It all goes a long way. I have also set up a Patreon account where you can support me and the creation of further content for a single $1 a month. Link is in the description below. Thank you for watching. Now I'll see you in the next one.